We begin the day with the expansion across America of the protests and the soldiers sent to contain them. It has been almost a week since demonstrators took to the streets in Los Angeles in anger over raids by federal agents targeting undocumented migrants. The scenes of National Guard troops in downtown L.A. were like fuel on the fire. Clashes erupted over the weekend. An overnight curfew is now in effect for downtown L.A. As the sun rose this morning, there were reports of similar protests in other U.S. cities. And today, the governor of Texas said he is calling up the National Guard. While California's governor says Trump's use of the military is illegal and an abuse of power, the governor of Texas is not waiting for Washington at all. Today, the White House described the unrest in Los Angeles as mob rule and said it would not be tolerated.
President Trump received a clear mandate from voters to reverse the illegal invasion ushered in by Joe Biden's open border and to end the lawlessness represented by Karen Bass in Gavin Newsom's California. President Trump promised to carry out the largest mass deportation campaign in American history, and left-wing riots will not deter him in that effort. Sanctuary cities and states will no longer be allowed to shield illegal criminals from deportation.
Our coverage continues now with Clayton Allen. He's a U.S. policy expert at the Eurasia Group. He joins me from Washington, D.C. It's good to have you with us. We're hearing that U.S. Marines are stationed outside of Los Angeles, ready to be deployed. The National Guard, those troops have been present in the city for days now. Has the U.S. president, has he already gone too far? Has he overreached?
Politically, no. Trump is actually playing to his strength here. Immigration is one of the few polling areas where Trump is actually above water. That is one of the few areas where more Americans support his stance on immigration than oppose it. And for Trump's base, a large portion of them will see positives in the image of the president combating or working against a Democratic mayor and a Democratic governor who they perceive as opposed to his sort of objectives. From a structural standpoint, it's a bit of a normative comment to say whether he has gone too far or not. I think that from a legal perspective, the administration's actually been relatively careful to walk right up to the line of what's legally permissible without going over it. Long term, this does paint a picture of a president willing to politicize the military in a way that we haven't seen in quite a while in the U.S.
The president was elected on a promise to crack down on illegal immigration, and the polls show that most Americans approve of his stance. Is he basically just implementing what he promised to do?
I wouldn't go so far as to say that this is implementing exactly what he promised to do. I think rather that this is thematically, at least, in line with the way that he campaigned. We're seeing somewhat unprecedented responses. They're not totally unprecedented. In 1992, for instance, the military, including active duty Marines at that time, were deployed into the Los Angeles basin at the request, though, of the mayor and governor. What we're seeing today is the federal government taking similar steps, but over the objection of those similar elected officials, painting this much more as a political contest between Republicans and Democrats, or rather between Trump and high-profile Democrats, including one who might run for president, more so than it is a collaborative effort to address a public safety concern.
The protests, the riots in 1992 in Los Angeles, they took place over a much broader surface area of the city. There are people who say that what we've seen in the past 5, 6, 7 days has been very small in comparison. How does that play into how we understand why the president is doing what he's doing?
It's crucially important to understanding how he's approaching this. The riots in 1992 were, as you know, very, very widespread. The property damage, risk to life was much greater. The protests that we're seeing today, I mean, not to sound glib, but they barely qualify as civil unrest on anywhere close to the same scale. That President Trump is using them to justify what are, or should be, very infrequent, very uncommon deployments of National Guard troops to support law enforcement and potentially active duty military forces to do the same, is a signal that he's willing to justify these very, extreme, although very clearly legal actions, all in pursuit of kind of to create a narrative of contest between himself and Democratic officials.
The director of ICE's Boston office says that among the people who've been detained, we're seeing murderers, rapists, drug traffickers, child sex predators. members of violent transnational criminal gangs. Are you satisfied with the evidence that has or hasn't been presented to corroborate this claim?
I'm not an attorney, nor am I an expert in criminal justice. It's not my place to make a quality judgment about the evidence presented for any of the specific detentions. That said, what we've seen covered in media suggests a much wider pattern of detention, a much wider pattern of apprehension, potentially deportation, than would necessarily be supported by some of these arguments. Certainly, we have seen evidence that some individuals deported not as part of the response to this unrest, but in earlier deportation rounds, did not have criminal records. So I can't make a justification or a judgment on the specific comments offered by the leadership at the Boston ICE office, but rather to take a step back. I think that's another piece of evidence that sees President Trump justifying or using as pretext this response to a very specific issue to justify a much broader response that, again, is appealing to his base and certainly presents a very aggressive front to Democratic elected officials.
We're seeing these protests spread across the country now, from coast to coast. How do you explain the level of outrage that we're seeing? I mean, are you surprised by what we're seeing?
To be quite honest, I'm not. This is something that we've been tracking for well over a year and a half as a potential outcome of some of the themes of this election. The themes of the 2024 election centered largely around divergence, difference, division within society. And we're seeing now some of those divergences, some of those divisions that were exacerbated and inflamed by much of the rhetoric around the 2024 campaign play out in real time. This is something that I think we had discussed. Our framing of it, I think, still holds, that civil unrest largely contained to large blue cities would be very targeted at specific issues, not as widespread, for instance, as the protest activity in 2020, certainly not as widespread as or as large scale as the protests in 1992. But these one-off and relatively contained incidents of unrest would be used to justify a much more overwhelming federal response.
Clayton Allen with the Eurasia Group. Mr. Allen, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. She's a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College in New York City. She's also the author of A Protest History of the United States, which came out earlier this year. Professor, it's good to have you back on the program. Let me ask you, what are the legal limits or constitutional checks on a president's ability to deploy federal troops or the National Guard domestically in a situation like what we're seeing in Los Angeles?
The legal limits are within the president's scope as the executive to federalize the National Guard. In the United States, the National Guard falls under the state government, but there are some federal laws that allow the U.S. president to federalize those state National Guard if they're an emergency. For example, if there's a tornado or a natural disaster, then the National Guard can come into certain neighborhoods and help. That's what we usually see. In this instance, the president has decided, beyond the wishes of the governor, to call in the National Guard. And in doing so, it's something that hasn't happened since 1964 or 65. And that was during the time period when this country was racially divided. And the president used the National Guard to help desegregate public schools, allowing Black children to attend those schools. That was the last time this was done. And so the limits are that the governor of the state usually asks for the National Guard to come in. In this instance, to override the wishes of the governor, this makes it really pushing the limits of what our federal government is doing. But once again, this is an administration that's pushing all types of legal limits.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you see this convergence of military deployment and aggressive immigration enforcement as a sign of growing federal overreach?
I believe I was on your program before when we talked about whether or not our country is in a constitutional crisis. And it is, because the executive branch under our Constitution has certain limited powers. This executive is really beyond the powers. It's legislating. And one of the things that makes a king is the ability to legislate and control the military. And in this instance, having the military sent into a state is really something a president does not do. And in this instance, protesters have been a part of the United States history from the very beginning. This country came about as protest against England's rule. And so protest is not new. What we have is a president that is using and gaining political strength and using our governmental resources to quash protests in liberal states, states that didn't vote for him. That's what's really frightening about this, that he's using his power in ways in which it's almost retribution against those people in those states that did not support his presidents or run.
So what role can the courts play, if any, in pushing back against this kind of executive action? I mean, we see that California is suing.
California is suing. And the problem is that we have these laws on the books, some of them from 1807, others from the 1700s, 1798, that were put in place during the time period in which the federal government was afraid of immigrants. So this is a nation of immigrants. As the world knows, this is a nation of immigrants, artificially created, a nation of people coming in from around the world. And so once people get in positions of power in the executive during the time period of the 1800s in the country, they began to fear certain immigrants. And so that's what we're seeing right now. The courts have been in many ways undermined because even though the governor is suing, the laws that are put in place are laws that are ancient, but allow the president these types of privileges and rights. And so the concern is laws that no one even thought about for the last 100, 200 years are being invoked against the immigrants in this country, but only against very vulnerable immigrants. You notice that it's against the day workers. It's against the people who are the working class and the poor. There are people in this country from other parts of the world who are in middle management positions who are overstayed their welcome, overstayed their visas, but he's not going against them. He's going against people from Latin America. He's going against people who are poor. And so I think, and in states that didn't support him. So I think it's very important for us to see that even though Governor Newsom can sue the federal government, the chances are slim against these laws, as ancient as they are, that he will win. So we have to figure out other ways to use the courts in order to support protesters and to support the governors and other liberal states that are going to want to stand up against this encroachment and this overreaching by the federal government.
Do you think that the president is trying to provoke court cases which will end up at the Supreme Court? And why would he do that?
That's a brilliant question. And I'm so glad you asked that, because we have a supermajority of conservatives. And many people are wondering, is he trying to gain more power, a deeper threshold, by having cases go to a Supreme Court, 3 of whom of the justices he picked personally? And so that way, not only will he have the power, that power will then have the moniker of law. And the Supreme Court supporting it. And the concern is, if that is the case, if the Supreme Court also says what he is doing is correct, and because the conservatives control the Congress, it's going to be up to the people to continue to protest, because we won't have either of our branches of government to go against the executive branch in this instance.
Yeah. How does this compare to past domestic deployments of troops that we've seen? I'm thinking of the 1992 LA riots, or even earlier during the civil rights protests in the 1960s.
Once again, those are protests in which the federal government was brought in, and the state government wanted the federal government or asked the federal government to assist. It's very rare to have a federal government just say, I'm going to send in military troops. I'm going to send in your National Guard, federalize them as soldiers under the federal auspices, not the state, and send them into your state. It's only happened, the last time was in the 1960s, and that was during the civil rights movement. So for this to be happening now sets a horrific precedent for any of the liberal states like New York State, where I live, and other places that did not support Trump's candidacy, because that means he's going to use the federal government to punish those states and to go against those governments that did not support him, and then using our federal government, our federal tax money, our federal military against the people smacks so much of authoritarianism that is frightening people, thus causing even more people to go out and protest. And now you see this circle that's starting to happen. More protests, more encroachment, more overreaching, more protests. So it's not coming to a good end.
What should we be watching for in terms of civil liberties and due process as the military takes to the streets in a domestic law enforcement role?
They're supposed to be limited. They are supposed to be people who are there with a particularized mission. And at this point, they're arresting anyone. They're not just arresting people who are assumed to be immigrants. They're arresting anyone who looks Latino, and they're arresting any alliances or any allies who are also protesting. They're not arresting people who are looting. They're arresting anyone who's exercising their civil rights and their civil liberties. And so they've gone well beyond the National Guard and the military, well beyond what they're supposed to be doing. But who's going to be there to call them back? The police? Now think about this. We have the local police, we have the National Guard, and we have the federal military, all encroaching on Los Angeles. And then we have the protesters in the midst of this whole thing. It's a disaster waiting to happen. And I think that this regime, this president, wants it to be chaos. He lives within chaos. And that way he can crack down even more and say, see, I'm bringing order to this. But he caused the chaos in the first place because the local police could have handled the situation. He put fuel on the fire and then sits back and says, I now have to call in more people to control what he's himself started.
Okay. Constitutional law professor Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. Professor, it's good to have you on the program. We appreciate you taking the time to share your insights with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's pick up some of those points with Ernesto Castaneda, who's director of the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies at the American University in Washington. Welcome to DW. We heard in the report ICE agents sometimes taking people away without warrants. So let's start there. Is that legal?
Hi, Phil. Thank you for having me. So in theory, yes, they can go to places where they suspect there are immigrants who may be in the country without papers, and they're allowed to ask for documentation. And if they don't have any, to take them. But the community is very alarmed because this is not what we had seen in the past. Ideally, for example, the Biden and the Obama administration had a priority list. So they would prioritize people with a criminal record. People that were dangerous criminals, they'll be the ones that they will have indeed the document, the name, the address, and then they will go and find them specifically. So they'll have a target list of people that the courts had already agreed to remove. And there will be an immigration judge that will have signed the warrant. Right. And now what we're seeing is as Stephen Miller increases the quotas, they are taking people more randomly.
Okay. And on that notion of randomness, is the expectation that everyone in the United States walks around with papers on them confirming their migration status? Because it will seem surprising to a lot of people that you can just walk into a place and say, you, show me your immigration papers.
That is indeed a problem, Phil. That's why a lot of people are worried. And that is not the law. I don't have to carry my passport around. I don't have to carry a documentation. Most people normally carry out the driver's licenses because they are driving or as a general ID. But sometimes that is not enough. In some states, immigrants can have a license.
Right.
So that is not enough to fend an immigration official. Okay. In the past, Arizona or Texas have passed laws to show me your papers, but nationwide, that's not the case.
So walk us through then what happens when ICE detains someone. Do they just disappear and then perhaps pop up again on a flight to Venezuela, or what happens?
Lately, we have literally been seeing that. Traditionally, the due process is that the person is detained and they're allowed to make a phone call to their lawyer or one family member who then can tell other people and a lawyer. And they tell the family where they are. There's a database online where you can find, look for the name of the person, and they will tell you they are detained in this office in downtown LA, so that the lawyers can go and try to help. And then the person would go in front of an immigration judge and try to say, no, I'm in the process of applying for asylum. I'm afraid for my deportation back to my country. I'm persecuted, and be allowed to show documents before they're put in a process of removal. If that is denied and they are not allowed, then they will be removed. But there is a very light process that most people lose, but there'll be a process. And what's happening with this administration lately is that people have been removed indeed to third countries without due process, and their families are not allowed to contact them, and the people detained are disappear because they are not allowed to contact their family members.
Right.
That's why there's a lot of anxiety. We also see that happening in LA these days.
Okay, but just to be clear, we have a duly elected president who said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to scoop up lots of illegal migrants. He has the absolute right to follow through on his campaign pledge and do what he said he was going to do, doesn't he?
Yes, but there's ways to do it. He could do this with regular ICE forces. He could do this following procedure, allowing the immigrants to make their case before they are deported, like previous administrations have done, like he himself did during his first administration. He deported a lot of people, and there is a way. So it wasn't challenged. It wasn't. People couldn't challenge it in court. But in this time, he's doing it in a way that is going around immigration law.
And so when we hear the director of ICE's Boston office, as we did in that report, say that amongst the detained were murderers, rapists, drug traffickers, child sex predators, and members of violent transnational criminal gangs, what defence can there be against that?
Well, this administration is prone to exaggeration, and their own numbers that they post online show that it's a small percentage of the people that have been detained or deported that actually had a criminal record. Most of the people deported are deported because they are out of status, because they don't have current immigration papers, which is one thing, and they can do. But this argument that they are taking only the dangerous people from the communities and that most people deported are criminals is not true according to their own data.
Thanks for talking us through that, Ernesto. Ernesto Castaneda from the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, the green, white and red of Mexico's national flag has become a defining symbol of the protests unfolding on the streets of Los Angeles. Demonstrators have carried the flags, often alongside the US stars and stripes, to show solidarity with immigrant communities and voice opposition to the ongoing immigration raids. The flags have drawn sharp criticism from President Donald Trump and the Republican Party, who've characterized the demonstrations as an invasion by a foreign enemy. Los Angeles County is home to the largest Mexican community in the United States. All right, well, for more on this, Alvaro Huerta joins us. He is an associate professor of ethnic studies at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. He joins us from Los Angeles. Welcome to DW News. So demonstrators waving Mexican flags have emerged as a symbol of the protests in LA. What does that flag stand for in these protests?
Well, thank you for having me. It's only a question of pride. It's a cultural pride. The administration wants to frame it as something other than that. But our Mexican people here, I'm of Mexican origin, I was born in this country, are being attacked. So it's a way to show that we are proud of where we come from, just like the Irish do, just like the Italians do, the German Americans do. So it's nothing more than that.
Right, well, Trump has claimed that LA is being invaded by a foreign enemy, right, and says that the protesters are foreign nationals waving foreign flags. What's your take on this?
Well, during the World Cup, we see everybody waving the flag, or if you go to the United Nations, all the flags are there. So there's no invasion whatsoever. Invasion implies that the Mexican people on this side of the border have an army. The only thing we have are leaf blowers and taco trucks. There's nothing to it. He's just scaring people and making them feel that brown people like myself are a threat, when in reality we're contributing to this country more than we're receiving.
How is the current situation affecting the large Mexican community in Los Angeles?
It's terrifying. I was born here, so I don't feel it myself, but I see my neighbors, I see my family members. My wife's a teacher. They're actually ICE, which is the immigration force. They're going to elementary schools. They've never done that before. So they're scaring the kids. And then the parents don't want to send their kids to school. They also, when immigrants go, they are registered with the government and going for appointments regarding their legal status here, they're being detained there. So it's not like they're hiding, they're actually going through the process of becoming citizens. So they're just, it's just a form of terrorism, of domestic terrorism, in my expert opinion.
Now, you've researched immigration and especially the narrative around Latino immigration in the US quite extensively.
Right.
How have things changed under this Trump administration?
It's changed to the extent where we become the scapegoat, where brown people that have always worked the fields, we've worked in restaurants, we've actually are lawyers and doctors and professors like myself who went to UC Berkeley and received this PhD. So we've been contributing to this country from day one. We went to war in defense of the United States during World War II, during Korea, during Vietnam, Afghanistan, on and on. So given all our contributions, we still, just like in the case of African Americans, feel and believe that we're being attacked because of the color of our skin, because we don't see this happening to other immigrants that come from Europe.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Alvaro Huerta, a associate professor of ethnic studies at California State Polytechnic University. Thank you.
So thank you very much.